Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. The middle of page 1269. Aleph Reish Samach Tes. Nekudis Reshimu and the Ayin Sof Shabbat. So he says that Reshimu has two things. The Etzem Nekudis Reshimu, which is, he calls it Nekuda. So think of it like this concentrated state of concealment. I was thinking of an example. And the second thing, before I give the example, is the Ein Sof that is concealed within it. Like we said in the previous paragraph, that it has within it everything that was there Pre-Tzimtzum. So I was thinking of an example, just an example. It's not a perfect example. But if you think of, let's say, an explosion, let's say a planet exploding, or anything, an explosion. The explosion, of course, shatters whatever object was intact before, and the pieces all fly off. But imagine the next step, a vapor, or something remains in the area where that explosion took place. Now, in some cases, like in a physical sense, it could be smoke, it could be debris, it could be particles, it could be radioactivity. It could be other forms, but imagine it's not visible physically, but it's there. Think of stars that have exploded, or planets that have exploded, or asteroids that have exploded, and there's something there, even though you may not see it. It could have actually very toxic or other type of very powerful force. So in a sense, if you think of the Tzimtzum like a big bang, which I think was mentioned, I've mentioned it many times, not actually that, because it's not a big bang. It's a big concealment. But if you think of it that it caused that all the Ein Sof should recede to the background or to the sides, the way the Arizal says it, obviously not physically, conceptually, and something remains that is a reminder, and it has everything that was there before the explosion happened. The Kav, on the other hand, is another role altogether. The Kav is the energy that comes into this space after this explosion, after this Tzimtzum, and begins to create. And we learned in the last paragraph the distinction between these two. They have very different roles. But the Reshimu, in this type of analogy, based on the Rebbe Rashal's explanation, has in it, even though it's concealed, like he said, it's Behelim, what he called Behelim in the previous paragraph, the Salmeir, Chinas Helim, but it's like I said, a silent witness of what was here before the Tzimtzum. Now, in this paragraph we're learning now, which we learned yesterday, I'll just sum it up now. So, one more point. And what's the benefit of that? The benefit of that is that when existence begins to be created, and we have to deal with the concealment of the divine, while also working on trying to reveal it, we have not just the Kav as our asset, we also have the Reshimu as our asset, because there's something there that is going to become the root of the containers, and it's there. It's not complete empty void. It's, however, not active in this conscious and revealed sense of the word. So in a way, we can then recreate pre-Tzimtzum reality through the Reshimu, not requiring a miracle. Like we're talking here, the whole theme in Ayin Beis, that it's about experiencing pre-Tzimtzum consciousness in a post-Tzimtzum reality. The Reshimu adds to that. It's not only the Reshimu. We spoke about transforming the very Tzimtzum, which is what we're actually talking about. Discovering this power in the Reshimu is like transforming the Tzimtzum, because you're discovering the divine power in this concealed state, the power of concealment, the power of Kerech HaGvul, the root of the containers, the letters, etc. But in addition to that, you also have the Kav. So the Kav is here to be a revelatory, a revelation. So the Kav and the Reshimu together, when they work together, you can recreate the pre-Tzimtzum reality in a revealed way. Because remember, as long as it remains concealed, it's fine, it's there, but the whole point is that you want to have godliness revealed in existence, including the pre-Tzimtzum oir, not just in the concealed state. Okay, so that just adds a little more explanation to the ideas. So we learned that the Reshimu now in order to understand this, is as Yodua, the Reshimu has two things. The etzem nekudas Reshimu, that would be in the context of what I just said, this concentrated, what I call, I don't want to use the word vapor because it's not really an accurate depiction of it. I don't want to use the word residue, or impression is a word that I have used, but think of it of an invisible ghost, if you wish, an invisible cloud of everything that was there pre-Tzimtzum in this Reshimu. But he has two parts here. There's the Nekudas Reshimu itself, which we're going to learn in a moment, is Koyach HaGvul, and then there's the Ein Sof, that it basically everything pre-Tzimtzum that lies concealed within it. So he says like this: the Ein Sof Shabbat, the Etzem Nekudas Reshimu. I'm going to go over this again, even though we read it. It's worth reading again, and then we'll go to the contrast to the other Reshimu, which is in Akudim. The etzem nekudas Reshimu hoyse klula ba'erein sof gam kedem atzimtzum. So even before the explosion, even before the concealment, the nekudas Reshimu was there. It was not visible, and it didn't have any identity. You wouldn't call it nekudas Reshimu. You don't call that when erein sof is filling the entire expanse of everything. You don't call it a nekuda or a Reshimu. But the point being, it was all there. Whatever the Reshimu has was there before. However, as I said, it's not yet the Reshimu until the Tzimtzum happens. Then he says like this, okay. And what is that? That's the Koyach HaGvul Sheba Sof, like we discussed at length yesterday. The power of Gvul, of Ein Sof, exists before the Tzimtzum. It wasn't created after the Tzimtzum. However, there it's not active, and it's completely submerged in God's all-encompassing omnipresence. Or I say God, the godly, not the God as an atzmus, but the godly energy that was all-encompassing. What happened then? Kushahaya tzimtzum, nisha Reshimu Ein Sof kenekudas benekudas Reshimu. So now when the tzimtzum comes and the whole Eid Habligvul, everything that was there is concealed, so then the Nekudas Reshimu remains, like it emerges now, once that Eid stuff like recedes. So now it emerges. It's just like saying the residue or the vapor that remains after an explosion. Before the explosion, there's no vapor. I mean, there exists, but I mean to say that which happens post the traumatic paradigm shift is there, all in a very different state. So now the Reshimu, Nisha Reshimu Ein Sof benekudas Reshimu, shenisal ma'ir al yedei nekudas Reshimu. So these words I explained yesterday, but just to reiterate that the Eir is concealed through the Nekudas Reshimu, because the Nekudas Reshimu and the Tzimtzum come together. So now the Eir is concealed through this Nekudas Reshimu. Yeah. Now he's going to explain more in the contrast that we began discussing yesterday. I may, by the way, have to finish this class early, but just one second. Okay, yes, I will. I will have to finish at 10:20. Just giving you a heads up. I have something. I have an interview on Newsmax. They made one for Thanksgiving. So we'll be a little shorter, but we'll try to make up for it by concentrating it all. Okay. I think we'll understand this line a little better when we learn further, because you'd say tzimtzum. But the tzimtzum, as I said, in the Nekudas Reshimu is now becoming a force, a concealed force, but it's concealed within the Nekudas Reshimu. Okay, I'm going to get back to this line. I want to explain it more, but I want to explain it after we read the entire section. And I also want to point out a footnote from the Rebbe in Cholzu, where he talks about this as well. I want to look inside because it may help us understand this. But let's now go to what we began discussing yesterday. Now he's going to make a contrast between another Reshimu that is talked about in Kabbalah and Eitz Chaim, and that's a Reshimu that remains, that allows that remains from the oir as the kalim are becoming shaped and formed. So there's a oir that's nimshach, it recedes as well, and it leaves a Roshem, and from that Roshem develops the kalim of Akudim. So let's read that, and we'll go over what we said yesterday and try to explain it more. Ve'ein zeh kamoi havayis hakeli or hakli ba'akudim. This is not like the creation or the coming into being. Havaya is an expression like coming into being, like hisavus, of the keli in Akudim. Shayidei hamsha. So we talked about yesterday that before Akudim there's no kelim. In Akudim you have 10 energies in one container. So the Eitz Chaim talks about the dynamics. How does this container emerge? So I gave the example, just an example, similar to the point of conception. When a seed fertilizes an egg and something conceives, a cell is created. A cell that carries in it all the power that when the cell will split and continue to split, will develop into a full-bodied fetus and a child. So in this case, what you have in Akudim is, before Akudim you have oir, a lot of intense energy. Then Akudim is going to be 10 energies in one container. So the Eitz Chaim explains how this container emerges. So it says like this. This is we read it yesterday, but I'm going over it again.
Which page?
Which page where? In Eitz Chaim or in Ayin Beis?
No, Ayin Beis.
Wherever we were up to yesterday, 1269.
Thank you.
So the voice of the kelim come through the hamshachas sa'er. As we discussed, even though keli and er have two different roots, but the actual creation of the keli comes through the hamshachas sa'er. And what's the process? The Isha Be'etz Chaim, it says in Eitz Chaim, Shar mati v'lei mati, Shar moti v'lei moti, Perek Aleph. It's a section in Eitz Chaim, chapter 1. The Keshanim Shecha Oyer, when the Oyer, excuse me, the Shekanim Shecha Oyer, when the Oyer, we're talking here the Oyer, really the Oyer Hakav, but it's generally the Oyer that is now being transmitted within Hishtalshlus. It began with the Kav after the Tzimtzum. It created the world of Ak, Adam, Kadmin. But now we're talking about the next world, Akudim. So it says when this Eir was Nimshach, the Nistalik, and then it was Nistalik because the Eir works like Ratzeh and Shuv, or Mati v'lei Mati. It reaches and goes back, like a lightning bolt, Ratzeh v'Shuv. So the energy is like a pulse. Think of it like a pulsating energy of a contraction and expansion. Like a pump. It goes forward and then it returns. So then it says, so even when it returns, so to speak, back, Reshimu, it leaves some impression. It's like even when the heart pumps, so even when the heart contracts and the blood so-called returns, there's still something that remains. She says, Hiniach Reshimu rather, by the histalkus v'richa ka'er nasa Reshimu b'chinas ivius yeser v'nasa b'chinas kli. So as long as the air is there, full intensity, the keli is too the keli will not be able to develop. Like we discussed, the parent, the teacher has to somewhat remove themselves to leave room for the independent entity to emerge. Too much oil would overwhelm the keli. So he says like this. So the oil is there. The air is nostalgic. It goes back, it recedes. It leaves a Roshem. And through the histalkus and richuk, ha'er, because the air has receded and is distanced itself from this space, so to speak, where the Roshem is. So the Roshem becomes thicker and it develops. Like I explained, for example, when you have very strong light, let's say the light of the sun, and it's very intense, nothing will be able to really emerge from it unless the sun somewhat weakens or steps back. So what happens now is that this Roshem now has something to hold on to. another example would be if you light a flame. If the flame is too intense and the wick is too fragile or too negligible, it won't burn. We learned about this in volume 1. The flame has to somewhat be subdued. If you have a very powerful flame, like a torch, and a very small wick, it'll burn out very quickly because there's nothing to hold on to. So the flame, as it weakens, the wick, so-called, can be a little stronger and more powerful, and then you have a balanced flame and a wick. Okay, so he says that, so the nasa Reshimu b'chinas iviyus yeser, so it becomes thicker, v'nasa b'chinas kli, and it becomes a keli. So this is how kelim are formed and created. Through the oir receding, you need some oir, you can't have no oir. The oir receding, leaving a Roshem, an impression, and then that impression develops and that becomes a keli. Like the example I gave was a teacher teaching a child Ayin Beis, so he has to allow the student to repeat Ayin Beis. If the teacher is completely domineering, you're not going to have a student standing on his own feet. So you give the student something to work with, then you say, now I'd like you to repeat, say Aleph, Beis, Gimel, or say Me'emesai, Kodesh Hashma Ba'arvin, or whatever it is. You have to let the keli develop and get build strength and confidence. That's the concept that he's saying here. So a Roshem remains and the Roshem develops into a keli. Okay. The Kodim Hamshachas Ha'er Lo Yoye B'chinas Keli Ba'Akudim. Before the air was nimshach, was transmitted or drawn there was no keli in Akudim. It's only when the air came. In other words, you need the air. Without the air, you have nothing is going to be created. So you need the air to come, and then hiniach reishim, it leaves this impression, and that impression now you have something to hold on to, like a handle, and it could develop into a keli. V'areishim hu ha'iviyus. And what is this Roshem? What is this impression? It's the iviyus, it's the thickness. Think of the particles. They were encompassed before in the air. So they're not just, with all in the air, like I spoke yesterday about boiling water, and it leaves residue, it leaves something. Same thing here. The air has a certain element of thickness of particles. They're really concealed in the air. Now I understand what he's saying here. Because now you can ask the question, 1 second. If I shine a light into, let's say, a certain area, and then I remove the light, there's no Roshem left. It's just as if it was, I shine a flashlight, I light a candle, and then I shut it off, or I move the flashlight, nothing remains there. The air is gone, so there's nothing remains. However, because the air has in itself some thickness, that's what the Eitz Chaim is saying. So even when the air is removed, it leaves over some shadow, some semblance, through which that will build into a full keli. This is the expression you find him Hisavas ha'eris nasa kelim. So the expression brought in Chassidus from Eitz Chaim, that from the thickness, you could say the particles in the air, the kelim are crafted or developed or conceived. Now it's important to mention, this does not mean the keli is created by the air. It means it travels through the air. Like I mentioned a number of times. Well, let's take the body and soul of a child. Upon the moment of conception, when a father and mother in a sacred union conceive, there are 3 things happening here. The father provides the seed, the mother is the egg, it gets fertilized, but you need God, the third partner, to say, I want to send a neshama down here. Take away the third partner, you can have everything work right, but you will not have a conception. Now, the way the Eibishter sends a neshama, the other way is, if you only have God and you don't have the parents, you don't have a keli. That's the Eibishter made. Of course, you can just make poof and a child will come into existence. But the Eibishter wanted it to be a keli. Who makes the keli? The parents do. Not just through their intimacy and union, but also they provide something to hold on to. The neshama now manifests. But how does it grow? It's not like here's a neshama waiting here, the body develops, and then upon birth, they come together. That's not how it works. The neshama and the guf are beginning to grow together from the moment of conception. So in other words, the development of the body is happening with the neshama. So even though the so-called source and root of the keli, or in this case, the body, is separate from the neshama does not create the body because it has its own sheidish hakelim, but the activation of that root is through the neshama. That's how the Eibishter made it. So like we say, to create the yesh of this world, you need atzmos. Only atzmos can create a real yesh. But he made it in a way that it should go through the oyer. It's not like just two tracks that are independent of each other. So in essence, they are coming from two different places, but the keli develops through the oyer, which of course explains also why the neshama and the guf work so well together, because they're not strangers. The Eibishter made it that the keli, the guf, will develop through the neshama, as the neshama and guf will both work together, and the baby or the fetus will grow and develop into a full-blown child, and then a birth, and then they live together for hopefully forever. So, but bringing it back here, that's the point. Me'ivia says, so the oyer has something in it. We learned in volume 1, beautiful concept. He spoke about oyer and keli. He said there's a keli within the oyer, and there's an oyer within the keli, and that's why they can interact that way. What does it mean? Not a keli. There's no physical container in the oyer, but the oyer is oyer pnimi that goes into a keli, has in it the DNA that tells it communicate and interact with the keli. So it's called keli sheba oyer. That's why, for example, in Bameh Madlikin, there's a whole chapter in Masechta Shabbos. What can you use to light Shabbos candle? Not everything is good. For example, metal is not a wick. You can't light a piece of metal. On the other hand, a very negligible thread, like I mentioned before, will burn out quickly. So there's a proper balance, coming to Hanukkah. You use cotton, not too much. If it's too thick, the flame won't be able to really catch. If it's too negligible, it'll burn out quickly. So you need a perfect balance. Same thing with the flame. If the flame is a massive torch, you're not going to have a Hanukkah candle. It's going to just burn the whole thing. On the other hand, if the flame is so small, it won't burn properly. So what you have is a perfect balance. The keli sheba oyer meets the oyer sheba keli. So really you have 4 stages we learned in volume 1. One is the oyer, one is the keli. Then there's how the oyer relates to the keli. It's like the teacher as he relates to the student. And then there's the keli as it relates to the oyer, the student as it relates to the teacher. And when you have those 4 elements in proper place, you have a proper and seamless communication. So it works like this. The oyer begins to be nimshach. The oyer has within it, you want to call it DNA, you can call it particles. It's not physical, but it knows that it knows and also carries the relationship with a keli, or else the oyer would never go into the keli. That's an oyer makiv, by the way. A transcendent energy does not go into keli. This one is ready to go into a keli. It's an oyer pnimi. So whether there are 2 opinions, whether the oyer actually has particles or the oyer is shapeless, but it's still, everyone agrees that it knows how to communicate with a keli, or else you won't have a balanced oyer and keli. On the other hand, the keli too has these 2, but the keli, so it begins with a very, very subtle piece of dust, so to speak, which is like the particles within the oyer. The oyer recedes, and this particle can now develop. For example, snowflakes. I once did a whole research on it because I wanted to compare the study of snow in Chassidus and how it is in science. A snowflake is a crystal that has to have a piece of dust or some particle upon which it freezes. If you did not have any dust in the air, you had no particles, snow would never develop. It's interesting. Now you won't see it, it's so small, it's tiny. So in other words, it's the air that as it freezes, it has to freeze around something. And that's what makes a snow crystal. So in many ways, it's the same idea. That in other words, even before, so in this case, so the oyer has this ivius. When the oyer is nistalic, it's removed, the ivius emerges. And that's why it remains, even when the oyer is not there, because it's not just light and dark. The light has in it the Roshem. That's what he says here.
Keli sheba oyer is the obvious, right?
Hareshim be'eshin estala ka'er. Because if it was purely light and keli, then when the light leaves, nothing remains. So he says, no, the light already has in it so-called a certain element of ivius, like he says, it's klula. I'll just go over again. Ivishe klula koydem ba'er, u'mishum zeh nistala kareshim be'eshin nistala ka'er. So something remains of it, and then it's able to develop into something more complete and a real full keli, as he explains. Okay.
So the keli sheboir is the obvious sheboir.
I'm not going to stop in the middle. People are learning with me here, and I don't want to confuse anyone. So let me finish the whole idea, and then you'll ask any question you like. Okay. Like he says in Shara Akudim, chapter 2. So we have Shar Moti Lemoti and Shara Akudim. And when the air recedes, and it's not that intense and overwhelming, that allows that the ivya, there should be more thickness in this particle, so to speak, that remained. And the example I gave again is the teacher has to convey, let's say, Aleph Beis to the student. So the teacher already has in his mind, the oyer has in it the potential keli, because as he's communicating to the student, but then he has to step back and tell the student, now I'd like you to say it. So now once the student has that space, the student can now develop and repeat Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet and slowly expand, and the keli develops and can own and understand the idea on his own. So it begins with an oyer that leaves the space for the container, and the container develops as the oyer allows it the space, because the oyer has so-called removed its dominant presence. But there's a Roshem because you need to have the idea. The Aleph Beis is necessary. If it's completely removed, you'll have nothing to work with. So you need to have that space. That's what he said here about Akudim and the Keli Ta'Akudim. Okay. Now he's going to contrast this with the Tzimtzum. You want to ask a question? Go ahead.
That
Any
means
questions?
that the keli sheboir, this is the obvious sheboir, right?
That's what I said, yeah.
And why is that not Tzimtzum, the Reshimu? This is the idea of Tzimtzum.
We're learning inside. We're going to learn. He's now going to explain. So he says, so this is how it is in Akudim. And he began to say, Ve'ein zeh, that by the Roshem, the Reshimu, after the Tzimtzum addition, it's not this way. And he's going to explain now why. He says like this, U'benekudas HaReshimu de'erein sof, einikein. In the Nekudas HaReshimu, which is the impression or we call it the vapor, the Nekuda that remained after the Tzimtzum addition of Erein Sof, so the Nekuda has Erein Sof, it doesn't work the same way. It's different. Einikein. The Etzem HaReshinu, Hainu B'chinas Keich HaGvul. The Reshimu is not from the Oyer. It's the Keich HaGvul. In the Reshimu that remains in Akudim, the Reshimu is part of the Oyer. The Oyer has an ivius in it, has a certain particle or thickness or DNA, whatever you want to call it, and that remains, and then the keli develops around it. Where it comes to the Reshimu of Erein Sof, he says, Einikein, the Etzem HaReshimu and B'chinas Keich HaGvul. The Vetzem, the very core of the Reshimu, is the power of Gvul. The Etzem HaReshimu and B'chinas Keich HaGvul, Hoye B'Erein Sof, Keidem HaTzimtzum. It was there in Erein Sof before the Tzimtzum, and nothing new happened here. The Keich HaGvul was there completely intact, and nothing new. The only thing that new is that it emerged, but nothing new happened. With the Akudim, a new thing is happening. A keli is being created, and the process is the oyer is nostalgic. It leaves an impression, and that impression then develops. Here, the Etzem HaReshimu is Keich HaGvul. That was an Erein Sof before the Tzimtzum, and nothing new was created. So what did happen? Something did happen. Before the Tzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum, when there was the revelation of the infinite, as I said, all-encompassing divine energy and consciousness, so then, prior to the Tzimtzum, it was not discernible, the Reshimu, the Koyach HaGvul. It wasn't discernible because the Eir HaBligvul, like you just said, the Gili Eretz of HaBligvul was the dominating factor. He qualifies and says, yes, there was a Gili, and we know there were Asius, Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Goliv Galifu B'Tehirei Elah, there were Asius, but the Asius were completely submerged within the Gili, so they were there, but they were not discernible. And at the same time, the Gili was shining through them. What happened through the Tzimtzum? Ukeshahayat Tzimtzum. What changed now when the Tzimtzum took place? I'm going to stop right here after this because I see I already have to go. Okay. Ukeshahayat Tzimtzum nase his gabrus de koyach hagvul shebe'ein sof. Now, as the Bligvul receded, so became now a so-called domination. I'll say domination is not the right word. An intensification of the Koyach HaGvul of Ein Sof that till now was completely concealed within the Ein Sof HaBligvul. Umepnei his gabrus, b'chinas Koyach HaGvul, and because now the Koyach HaGvul, the Eibishter said, I want to make it Tzimtzum now, which means I want the Koyach HaGvul to emerge. Sometimes it says the Koyach HaGvul and the Koyach HaTzimtzum are connected, because in order to have Gvul, it needs Tzimtzum. So he says, so now that you have, that's a good, oh no, actually I skipped a line, sorry. I skipped, did I skip a line? Oh, no. Yeah, because Nas's Gab is no, I didn't. Nas's Gab is the Koyach HaGvul Sheb Ein Sof. Yeah. So now the Koyach HaGvul of the Ein Sof has become intensified. The Koyach HaEir HaBligvul has become concealed. So everything's like inside out now, turned inside out. Okay. What he's going to continue to say, and I have to stop now, I really don't have a choice. He's going to continue to say what happens now, whatever happened before the Tzimtzum, that the Koyach HaGvul was encompassed in the Eir HaBligvul, now is going to be the opposite way. That in the Reshimu, after the Tzimtzum, is going to encompass everything that was there before the Tzimtzum. Like in other words, before the planet explodes, so whatever will follow the explosion was there already before the explosion. But it was all concealed because it didn't explode yet. Once the explosion happens, whatever remains is the dominant force, and in it is concealed the vapor and everything that was there from before, the memory or the state of being that was there before, but now it's in a Reshimu state, as we'll discuss. I have to stop now, so I will take questions tomorrow. I really apologize, but I'm really no choice. So I'm going to stop right here by this